It's fantastic to see so many of you here that were here last year. This time last year we had a great time, and it's great to see that you've all come back, and also so many new faces as well. So thanks for joining us for this morning's session on social media, business intelligence, and bridging the SSMS BS divide, which is quite a lot of stuff. You know, there's quite a lot of topics in there. So let's break it down to exactly what we're going to be looking into. So today's going to be all about working across different technologies. So we're going to understand a business need, and what we mean by this is actually identify a business question that your organisation perhaps needs the answer to. And once we've identified that need, we're going to go about implementing a solution, but we're going to work in lots of different strategies, lots of different technologies. In fact, Noemi's even convinced me today, against my better judgment, to work from a Mac with a Windows virtual machine. So we really are using all different technologies. We're going to be developing in both Visual Studio and SQL Server Management Studio with SQL Server 2012. And the development work we're going to do is to bring some CRM data into a warehouse and combine that with some data that we actually pull down from Twitter. Once we've got that data and we're putting it all together, we're going to look at deploying that out. And then finally, we're going to combine the two data sets using Google Fusion tables to create a really nice map that actually presents the results of this question, which we will identify shortly, in a really nice way. So before we move on, why don't you tell us a little bit about the BI system?
Sure. So before actually I tell about the BI system, I did manage to get him on using a Mac, but unfortunately, my laptop is not necessarily in the best of behavior. So you will have to bear with us if you get any, like flicking the screen madness. So we've done 3 million testing, and we hope that it will be fine. But bear with us if it goes a bit weird.
I'm told it just works.
So let's start with the BI system. How many of you are BI developers? Yeah? Yay. So for those of you who are not BI developers, I'll just quickly review what the normal or the most standard BI platform looks like. So normally you have a whole selection of data sources. So you would have SQL Server, you can have Oracle, Access, Excel, flat files, web services, and all of them come to your analysis area at different speeds, at different rates. You may have some data that comes every minute, some sets of data that come every hour, every day, every month. And that's what you potentially use integration services to move that data into a staging database. So you want the fastest speed to come across and not having to worry too much about the manipulation at that stage. And then hopefully you use as well integration services to then denormalize that information and then put it in the optimum, either a Star Schema or Snowflake, depending on your requirements, into your data warehouse. And hopefully you may or may not use integration services to then publish that information out for other people to actually make use of that data and get to analyze it. You may use the UDM, you may use the multidimensional model from analysis services in terms of cubes. You may go to the tabular model. There is a little typo there. Who knows what my mistype is? Yes, no one. No, you're not allowed. He's starting in Ragged on Monday, so he's not allowed. So the BISM, Microsoft, with the lovely naming strategies, decided to call the tabular model, which is a new analysis services technology available in 2012. Initially, they call it the BISM. And then they decided that actually we're going to call everything BISM in terms of analysis services. And then they have the multidimensional model and the tabular model. So I have that there, and then I forgot to update it, so sorry. So we have the two models. Then we also have Power View to publish that information, also available with part of SQL Server 2012 and SharePoint. We have reporting services. You can have Excel. You can have a whole selection of different third-party vendors or custom-made reports that read from that information. But today, I'm going to show you how to publish that information to Google Fusion tables and then see what an interesting way of overlapping different sets of data. So now we've overviewed the BI system. So let's move on to what is the business question we're trying to answer today, or hope to answer today. So would like, maybe your customers, your client, your boss comes around and said, well, I would like to know the number of orders we sell, in regions or places, and see what people, do people talk about our brands in that location? So basically, we're saying, okay, I know where all of my customers are, where I ship my products. So in our case, we're using AdventureWorks, super awesome company. And one of the products that AdventureWorks sells is bicycles. So we're going to be using the shipping address because normally that person will receive that bicycle, will use it, get so excited and tweet about, oh, my super awesome bicycle. And on the other hand, we have the information in Twitter. So let's retrieve that information down with a few search terms. So, and we'll be using the Twitter search API. We'll cover what the two options you have depending on the amount of tweets that you're interested in. But in this example, we'll be using the Twitter search API. So then we can then combine where people talk about our brand or products with where we sell those products. So I don't know how many of you tend to go to, say, Tesco's or Sainsbury's or some new, I don't know, shop. And then you might have on the shelf Coca-Cola and Schuffenhasen cola.
It's my favourite.
It's your favourite. So obviously the one that you know, even though the other one might be better, might be cheaper, most likely you're going to buy Coca-Cola because it's the one you've heard, it's the one you've tried before, the one that your friends talk about. Just because you know it, you're familiar with it, you're more likely to buy that one than the other. Not necessarily you will, but most likely you will. So if we're looking to where people talk about our brand or our products in Twitter, but yet we're not selling on that location, we do have a starting point for seeing is there a penetration opportunity for us in that particular region. So let's see how we can make that happen. So we know roughly what sort of information we would like to have a look at. So the next thing is actually identifying. So obviously this part of our project is giving information so it can be analyzed deeper and then publish some information to Google Fusion tables to quick overlay that information. So on the top, we have what CRM would look like. So I've selected a few dimensions and few measures. So I have the country where we ship that particular product. We have the date of when the order was placed, the product category, product salespeople, and sales territory. We could have more dimensions just for simplicity, just a few. And then in terms of the measures, we have how much money we've made in all of those orders, how many orders we actually have had, and how many items are on those orders. And then in the bottom one, we have the data mart for Twitter. In this particular case, we have 3 dimensions. We could have quite a few more, but for simplicity, again, only the 3 of them. So we have the country, the city where the tweet took place, when the date of the tweet, and the search term used to pull that information down. And then we have the number of tweets, the number of hashtags used, the number of users. You could have a whole selection, number of followers, I don't know, a whole selection of data, but again, simplicity, just this. So you may have noticed that the 2 data sets, sorry about the display, but the 2 data sets actually have something in common. And both of them share the city, the location, the geolocation, a place where an event, the 2 events happen, and the time when that particular event happens. So when they buy, when they tweet, where they actually receive that bicycle, and where they actually tweeted that particular thing. One of the things with Twitter, though, is that when you retrieve the information, you know, how many of you use Twitter? How many of you use Facebook? Google Plus? Okay. So in all of 3 of them, you have the option of selecting if you want to put the location whilst you're tweeting or when you're Facebooking, I don't know, when you're putting your update. And then the thing is that not many people, how many of you actually put the location when you're tweeting? So you've seen the hands before, you see the hands now. So not all the time people would be willing to share that information with the public audience. But there is a workaround. You can always go to the user profile, which is also public, as long as they made their Twitter feed public, obviously, and check if they have a location, you know, their hometown. So you could get as a good proxy in terms of that profile as a location of that particular tweet. So what we're trying to do is combine those 2 sets of data, CRM information, Twitter information, put it nicely together, and then create a whole selection of reports. Again, only today we'll be seeing Google Fusion tables, but hopefully that gives an incredibly insight to the combination of those 2 sets of data to the company and see where potential penetration areas or regions within the world we could take on. So now we're going to the technical details. So how do we implement this, Tom?
How do we implement this? Well, you did a lovely job of identifying the question, which to me is what's Google+. But we have a choice to make at this point. So along with the arrival of SQL Server 2012, we also gained the ability to do our business intelligence development in Visual Studio 2010. And this can cause some disagreements. So at Redgate, we speak to our customers regularly as much as we can and listen to their concerns. And one of the things that we're hearing is that there's often two camps within an organisation. So how many people here develop in Visual Studio?
Yes.
And how many people use Management Studio?
The same amount of people.
Okay. So what we're hearing is that within organisations, there's pressure being put on people to adopt one method of actually doing their development work. So people who are quite happy in Management Studio, because it does what I need, it solves the problem, I can do exactly what I want to do, are being asked to adopt Visual Studio as their development environment. And they're not very happy about that. Whereas other people are saying, come on, Visual Studio is the way forward. We're proper developers, we should be using Visual Studio. Like someone over here. But at Redgate, we don't believe you have to make a choice. Instead, everybody should be able to work in the environment that they're comfortable in, and you should be able to work together on the same solution and share your changes across your source control repository. So that's exactly what we're going to look at now. We're going to go through the implementation, and I'm going to work sensibly in SQL Server Management Studio using a database connected to source control with SQL Source Control. And Noemi is going to work in Visual Studio 2010 using the AnkSVM plugin, and is actually going to connect her database project with SQL Connect to the same repository that I'm using. So, shall we see how we get on?
Yes. This is the part where you can actually flick a little bit, so bear with us. The other direction. There you go. Yoo-hoo!
Just a little. Okay, so like any sensible developer, the first thing that I need to do is get my databases under source control. And to do this, I'm going to create myself some repositories. So I'm going to head over into my project folder here, right-click and create a repository. I'm going to copy that path because I'm going to use it in just a minute, and then minimize that down. So with SQL Source Control installed, it's actually really easy to link your databases to your source control repositories. All I need to do is right-click on the database and select Link Database to Source Control. And here you see we support all of the major source control systems, and with this More option at the bottom, we can actually support any source control system that has a command line interface. So whatever you're using, you should be able to tag SQL Source Control onto the end of it. So we're using Subversion, and I'm going to paste in the URL to my repository and add a subfolder for AdventureWorks. We're working in the dedicated model today, so that means that every developer has their own database to work in. I'll be working in a Warehouse SSMS, and Noemi will be working in Warehouse VS. So once we've added those details, we can go ahead and click Link, and it tells me it's creating a subfolder. That's fine. And very quickly, we're linked up to source control, and you'll notice in the Object Explorer that the database icon turns to this green colour, showing that that connection's in place. So I'm going to repeat the same steps for my warehouse database. Link database to source control, Subversion, paste in my URL, add my subfolder, warehouse, dedicated development model, and link to source control. Yep, I know you're creating a subfolder. And quick as a flash, we're all linked up and connected. Much quicker than it did it yesterday, actually.
You won't believe yesterday we had a bit of a slow part in this section because the VM was not working. So every time you see me, it's actually because it's working what it should do today. So I'm quite pleased. Sorry.
Someone gave the VM 1 gig of RAM to handle everything. Who has less than 4 gigs of RAM here? Less than 8? See, one's not enough.
I know, sorry.
So you'll notice that we've now got this blue icon pop up on the Object Explorer tree. And this is telling us that we've got objects in our database that haven't yet been committed to source control. So you'll see this when an object's new and just been created, but also when you've made a change, so if you've edited an object. So the first thing we need to do is commit these objects into source control. So I can either switch to the Commit Changes tab, or for those of you who are like me and lazy, I can right-click and commit changes. And what happens here is actually, it's the SQL Compare engine within SQL Source Control that's having a look at the repository, which is obviously empty because we've just created it, comparing it to the objects in the database, and then converting those into the actual create scripts for those database objects. So if you see when I click on these objects down the bottom here, this is the SQL create script for the object as it appears in the database, and on the right hand side here, this is how it appears in source control. Nothing currently. So I can add a very helpful comment, as always, and click commit. And SQL source control will take care of taking all of those objects, pushing them into source control for me. It doesn't take long. Now I would do the same thing for my warehouse SSMS database, but that's actually not got anything in it just yet. I'll just show you that it's empty. So I can begin my development work. Now very sensibly, because it's a live demo, I actually brought the script with me to save me having to type on the fly. So I've got two scripts here. Don't worry too much about the details of these. The first one is actually just creating the objects on the AdventureWorks database that I'm going to use to extract the information I need for the warehouse. And then the second one that I'm going to run is creating the objects that are needed to actually push that information into the warehouse. So that one's been successful. Switch to my second script. And Noemi will talk a bit more about these when we get onto the packages, so it will all become clear. Okay, so I'm done. And again, you can now see the blue indicator in the Object Explorer showing that there's these new objects to commit. So let's commit those. Right-click, commit changes. I've added stuff.
Very useful comment, yeah?
Oh, well, you know me. I like
How
to
many
be
of you
clear.
are used to these type of comments, or maybe ASDF? Yeah? 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 Okay.
And the same for my warehouse database.
Don't put ASDF though.
And that's me done.
Thank you, Tom.
It's all right.
Yeah, it's all right. So he's done all of his work in Management Studio. But again, you know, with the introduction of SQL Server 2012, I can finally move on to Visual Studio 2010 and do all of my development in there. So the first thing I need to do to be able to work in Visual Studio is to create my own repository where I'm going to use for my particular project. So I'm going to go into my folder, right-click, and then SVN checkout. I'm going to use the project that he created where he submitted his files for the warehouse and AdventureWorks database, and I click OK. And that will check all of the files that have been pushed into source control SVN in this case, so all of the creation scripts. So once that's finished, there you go. Oh, yes, it was like 10 minutes. It's such a relief today. So now the files have been checked out. So one of the options that SQL Connect has is that I can actually directly import from a source control project. So he submitted his files into a source control project. So all I have to do is import from source control. So again, I need to browse to that location. So I'll go to there slowly but surely. And in my particular project, I'm going to be creating objects in Warehouse, not necessarily in AdventureWorks, but I could also add AdventureWorks to my solution. So I select Warehouse, I click OK, I click Imports, and now it's going to create a database project within Visual Studio. So now the first thing I want to do, one of the things that is cool about SQL Connect, and especially for BI developers, is that I can work against a real database. So even though I've got my files in the Visual Studio project, I can work with a real database behind the scenes. This is quite handy when you're testing integration services projects, packages, and you're trying to move data around. So to do that, the first thing I want to do, I can then synchronize, but I need to specify which server I want to connect to. Again, I'm not necessarily working in a repository within Management Studio or SQL Server. I'm working in Visual Studio with files, but pushing the changes to a database so I can then manipulate data, back and forth. So let's open the properties, and I'm going to say, okay, I've got this server here, SQL 2012, and I'm going to call warehouse VS, did I type that right? Yes. When I close it, it will automatically save the changes, and if I click synchronize, now it's taking all of the objects from the repository and pushing it to a real database. Again, in Visual Studio, I'm working with files, but pushing those changes down to a real database, yeah? So now it's synchronized, so if I expand here, I can see the objects he created in source control earlier. So for example, in here, I can right-click and create new table. And I have a very similar interface that I would have within Management Studio. So let's say that for example, I can create ID and int, and then I move this a little bit, apply changes, and I'm going to call this blah, because I create super useful objects as well.
About my comments?
No. So I've got my super useful object there, and again, I just synchronize to push those changes through. Yeah. So now, please don't go slow. Yay. So now I have my new object here. So you can obviously write all of this script from here. You can create the objects using the UI. And again, as I'm also, came prepared, I'm just going to execute some scripts that will create all of the objects that are necessary for the packages to then use. So I create open, there you go. So I execute here. So what I'm doing is creating objects in Warehouse for pushing that information in. So basically creating the schema for the tables that will receive the data, some of stored procs, mainly around tweeted data. So I'll execute that information. It will ask me where do I want to connect, and done. And again, I will do exactly the same for another script I've got. Again, don't worry too much about the SQL, because it's all about stored procedures to move data around and tables to be created, really. I execute, click connect. Yay, so fast. Synchronize. Now, all of the objects will suddenly now appear in here. So now I've got all of the database changes I needed to do within Visual Studio without having to go to Management Studio at all. The next thing I want to do is add my integration services projects to my solution. So then I have my database projects, my packages, and I could have, reporting services or analysis services as well within my solution. So everything ties together. So I'm going to select the solution, go to File, Add, New Project. Now within the introduction of SQL Server 2012 and VS 2010, I have a whole selection of business intelligence projects templates in here. So I'm going to call this SSIS Tweeter. And and click OK. Now I'm creating an integration services project within my solution. And again, I came prepared. So I'm going to import the package that will pull the information from AdventureWorks. So add existing package, browse from the file system, AdventureWorks, click OK. And now if I open that package, in this package is very simple. All I'm doing in here is, in each of those data flow tasks, I'm looking for the source data. For example, in terms of the sales territory, bring that sales territory, check if that territory already exists. If it does exist, has it been modified? If so, update it. And if it hasn't been modified, then do nothing. And if it's new, then insert it. All of them follow similar pattern. So I'm going to be brave enough and run this on the fly. If it doesn't work, please don't throw stuff at me. So one of the things, I don't know, how many of you have used integration services in VS 2010? How many of you are so happy that you have undo? Yes! So that's one of the cool things. You finally have undo, which is, I don't know what they, yes, it's great. So now all of the data from AdventureWorks is now in the warehouse. So the next package I have, and all nice and green, lovely. The upload to Fusion table, I've got it commented out because I've already uploaded that information, so I don't want to do that again. But I'll cover the code in a minute. So now the next thing I want to do is import the Twitter package, and we'll go through that one in a bit more detail. Oh, it turned green. I'm so happy. Okay. So with this package, never mind. Hey, I also have this. This is very cool. Anyway, so with this, with this package, do you see? No, it's too small. A little bit. If you don't see, just no, I don't see. So in this package, so I've got a table which has all of the search terms I'm interested in. Again, I'm using the Twitter Search API. The reason why I'm using the Twitter Search API is because adventure work is not very a popular subject in Twitter. But also is because, if it depends on your needs. So for example, if you're interested in monitoring a particular search term that only has like 100 tweets an hour, you're perfectly fine with the Search API. It's got limitation, I think it's 1,500 tweets that you can pull down. But if you then have like 10,000 a minute, then probably the Search API is not the best platform. You would have to move on to the Streaming API. The Streaming API works very similar to when you have your browser open and you see the tweets coming. So basically you have to be listening rather than pulling the data down. Or alternatively, you can go to a third-party vendor and then connect directly to the firehose. That obviously comes with a cost. So depending on your flow of tweets, you might want to go for one option or the other. In this case, I'm using the Search API. So I have a whole selection of search terms. In this case, I've selected Adventure Works, very popular subject. And to make it a bit more visually entertaining, I also use the MSBI. So I'm pretending that MSBI is actually a product of Adventure Works. So I looked any search term I have, and then I loop through for every single Twitter search term. I'll go into Twitter, grab the information from Twitter down. That comes in a JSON format. I'll show you the code in a second. Comes in a JSON format, manipulate it, and push it down to the database. It comes with a Twitter ID, so it's always unique. So you can very easily deduplicate if you have different people retweeting and all of that. And then once I've got that information down, then I have a second component here that will pull that information and then up to Google Fusion Table. Both of them are APIs, yeah? So let me open the Twitter data for a moment. I don't want to go into too much detail. One of the things I don't like in presentation is to go through a lot of code line by line because it's nicer to see it in your own desk. So I'll cover that in a little bit of detail, but if you're interested in the code, I'm happy to share. So if either drop me an email or I'll give you my code at the end. If you're interested in the code, I'll just give it out. It's for you to play with. So I open this up, and this one is actually the package that goes to Twitter and pull the information down. So now in here, I created a class for Twitter, and that one I'm not using the authenticated mode, so I'm completely anonymous to them. So I go to Twitter, pull the information down, manipulate the JSON object, and there are two things. As I mentioned earlier, when you're in Twitter, you get, if the person put the location when they tweet, you get the longitude and latitude in that particular moment. But if you go to the user profile, you get the city name or whatever they might have written down. So for that, I use the Google Maps API to convert that into longitude and latitude. So you can convert both ways. In my case, I was more interested in the longitude and latitude. So when I cannot work out what latitude they are, because either in their user profile they don't have it or whatever that might be, I'll give them 666, which is the location of hell. And I thought that was very appropriate when I cannot find out what location that might be. So I'll briefly cover, because again, looking code on the screen, it might not be that handy, but I'm using the non-authenticated mode. And again, just pulling the information, processing the JSON object. One thing though, as you know, if you've used a script task before, if I'm using to be able to process that JSON object, it's very similar to XML for those of you who don't know what a JSON object is. When you're trying to, if you're trying to process the JSON object, I'm using the Newtonsoft DLL, which allows me to do all of that processing. And in integration services, to be able to use an external DLL, you have to declare it in the GAC. Until BEADS 2008, it was using GAC utils. In VS 2012, SQL Server 2012, VS 2010, they have two different GAC utils. One GAC util for the .NET Framework 4 and GAC utils for the before. So if you're trying to use this, if you want the code and all of that, if you're trying to use it, you have to declare that in the GAC. And because they are so good to us, they don't provide that GAC util when you install it, so you actually have to download it from the web. Again, I've got the instructions here, so if you really want to play around, drop me a line, I'll send the code, and you'll know exactly how you have to declare that particular DLL in the GAG. So I really don't want to bore you too much with the code again, so I'll close that down. Now, the other thing is Google Fusion tables. So if I go back to the control flow, all I'm doing is retrieving using a stored proc from the database all of the data and pushing it up to Google Fusion table. Obviously, I've removed certain information. I don't want to have my customer details in there, so all I have is account number. And for Twitter, because it's public information, I don't necessarily care. So in this case, again, it's an API. It's very, I mean, both Google and Twitter, they're very good in documenting, so everything is documented out. There are example codes everywhere. It's very easy to use. And I've got something if you don't fancy developing as well. Open. Did I click? Yeah. So again, very similar to what I did with the Twitter information. And go to the table. One of the things that Google Fusion tables is literally a SQL-like storage. So you can use very similar syntax for SQL that you use in SQL Server. So in this case, what I'm doing is, does this table exist? If it doesn't exist, create it. So I can actually upload the information. And then for every row that I receive from the database in SQL Server, upload it to Fusion tables. Yeah? It gets confusing? Confusing? No? Maybe? A little bit? Yes? Okay, so Fusion tables is like a SQL Server, but in the cloud. So all I'm using is the same scripting mechanism to create the objects there. So create a table and then insert in rows. To insert the rows, I'll select from SQL Server the particular row and then upload that row and insert it into the cloud storage. Cool. Again, happy to share the code, don't forget. So I'll close that up before I confuse you more. And I'm not going to run this because I already did, and I've already uploaded that information up. So let's assume that I have run that and turned to green. Oy. And now that I've made all of my changes, I can commit my whole solution into source code. Oy, what did I do? What did I do? Where is my solution explorer? Oy. There you go. Thank you. So I right click and I'm going to commit all of my changes into source control. Again, I've got my database project and I've got my integrations packages, and I could have my analysis services, reporting, whatever that might be that I have next to it. So commit solution changes and
oh, ha, ha, ha.
There you go. Thanks. You're welcome. So now I've committed all of my changes into source control. I'm most likely ready to deployment, but I don't like deployments.
You go ahead.
No. I like developing and someone else to worry about the deployment. How many of you like that too? Yes, yes, there you go. So before I move on, and please don't, there you go. Considerations. So Twitter, if you don't like coding in C#, which you might not like it, there is third-party vendors who produce already connectors, so you don't have to worry about the code. The one that I know, there might be others, is RSS Bus. Obviously, you have to pay, and you have to get the connector, but you don't have to worry about getting all of the code in, so you can actually use their connector to pull that information down. They have Twitter, they have Facebook, they have Google, they have Salesforce, they have a whole selection of connectors that you might want to use without having to code yourself. And again, the Twitter libraries and documentation is actually very good, so very easy to copy and paste. So if I go back, no, I don't need to go back. Don't get upset. There you go. So I don't like deployment.
No, no, you
So
don't.
you do the deployment.
So once upon a time, I possibly feel the same way and feel that deployment was one of those tedious, laborious, horrible things that someone has to do and nobody really wants to do it. But of course, then SQL Compare came along. How many people here use SQL Compare? Okay, excellent. So SQL Compare is Redgate's schema comparison and synchronization tool. I mentioned earlier that it's actually the engine that's running inside of SQL source control. So that's the bit that's doing that check-in to see what the differences are, and then creating the script or actually performing the deployment itself over into the target. But there's a couple of new things that we've added recently that I wanted to share with you today. So I don't mind doing the deployment. It's okay. So if we head back into Management Studio, hopefully, then there's two things that I want to show you. First of all, I want to show you the integration of SQL Compare into SQL Server Management Studio. And then I also want to show you how it now integrates with SQL Source Control so that you'd never actually have to touch your production environment or your target. So when I'm ready to deploy, I can right-click on my database, and I've got this option, Compare Schemas To. So rather than having to load up SQL Compare separately, I can actually just select this, and I'm ready to set my options here within Management Studio. So I'm going to go from Source Control. I'm going to select my repository, Warehouse SSMS, and I'm going to go from the latest revision. And like I said, now I'm not going directly from the database. I'm actually looking in the Source Control repository. So I know that the last version I deployed to production was actually, move over here and select the same repository. Oh, thank you. Select the same repository. I know that the last version that was actually deployed to production was version 7 when I finished earlier. So if I set version 7 as the target and the latest head revision as the source, then the resulting script is actually going to be the diff script to upgrade our production server. So scrolling over, I hit Compare Schemas Now, and in just a couple of ticks, you'll see that it produces that script, which I can then package up with the rest of the updates to any other releases that need to take place, or pass to the person who's got the permissions, the authorization to actually implement that on the target server. So here we go. Here's the difference report. I can see all of the objects that have been created. Blah, really? So I can select everything and not include blah in our deployment.
Such a useful object.
And then click on the deployment wizard, and one more click, and you'll see that I'm actually able to bring up the script that is actually going to perform that deployment for us. So it's easy. I don't care. I don't mind.
Don't care.
Out of interest, actually, who works with analysis services? Okay, so in terms of deployment, you might have a nice surprise, might you?
Yes.
Super. Let's switch back, and I think what we can say is, what we've shown is that Visual Studio and SQL Server Management Studio can live together in harmony, best friends forever, using SQL Connect. So,
Yeah.
okay. All is forgiven, particularly my comments, right?
It's actually that was, as a relief from yesterday that did not work very well. So we're so happy. Okay, so moving on. This is the part that gets very exciting. How many of you know what fusion tables are? Oh, at least 3 hands. Yes, it was just one. So Google Fusion Tables, again, is a cloud storage, basically, and allows you to gather information, push it together, and it has a built-in set of different visualizations that takes very little time to render, which you will see in a minute. So let's just go and see it, really. So I go back to Chrome in this particular case. So this is, come back here. This is how you access Google Fusion Tables. So within Google Docs, you can have many different, multiple types of documents, and one of them is Fusion Table. You can create it, as I did, automatically push it out using the API, but you also have the option, let's say that you have an Excel with a whole selection of location information and some customer or some data with it, and you would like to visualize it in a map really quickly. The Guardian, for example, uses Fusion Tables quite dramatically. Dramatically, I don't know, often. So you can upload a file, so you can do it through the API, automatically have a package that pushes data up, or you can actually upload it by creating a table using that little table beta. It's still in beta, but it's quite powerful at the moment. So within my integration services package, I created this table. So I'm going to go inside. I'm going to go ahead and go inside.
Go ahead.
And within this table, you can see that I've got the location of hell and the rest of geolocations on there. And then I have a combination of tweets and and account information. Not very obvious from here, but you'll see it in a second. So Google Fusion Table automatically detects which columns are a location, a geographic location. You can also modify that as well. You can tell it, no, actually this is the location. And it will work out where it needs to plot that information in a map. So if I go to visualize, and I go to visualize as a map, automatically it would render all of that information. Again, this takes about 2 to 3 seconds with all of that data. It's doing it on the fly. It's not that it's pre-cached or anything like that. So with this information here, I can actually go inside and very easily detect where there is a gap between the red and the blue dots. What is the red dots? So red dots are actually tweets. And the blue dots are where my customer purchased a particular product. Yeah. So in this case, I didn't want to push information from that particular customer into the cloud, although it's a vendor work. So, but only put some ID that I can recognize, but not necessarily anybody else that can go in there. This is private. I'm not sharing this Google spreadsheet with anyone. It's up to you who you want to share it with. You have to be logged in to be able to use Google Docs. So one of the cool things about this, though, come out, is that then I can detect areas in the world where people are talking about my particular products and see, actually, in India there is an opportunity, for my particular brand or my products to, they're already talking about it. So why not do something to see if we can start selling in there? So it would be a starting point on doing a further analysis if it makes sense for your company to actually go to that particular region. In all of this time, we've talked about combining the two data sets, but we haven't talked about sentiment. Yeah. So at the moment, all we know is that someone said something in that location with that particular word in their tweet. So in terms of sentiment, obviously, if you wanted to analyze what that particular tweet sentiment is, you probably need to get some machine learning guy. However, it doesn't really matter whether it's a bad comment or a good comment, because it's a good comment, you can reinforce it. So that particular person continues talking about your brand. And if it's a bad comment, you can take the opportunity to address it. So if someone says, oh, this is rubbish, you can always go in there and say, oh, tell me what the problem is, and I can, perhaps address it. So you're using the same channel that person is communicating with you to reply back. So you can then convert into the happy zone. So again, if you want to do sentiment analysis, get someone who is a bit more expert in the field. But obviously, you can also have a human reading. It depends on the amount of tweets you have. Another interesting thing is that within the Google Fusion tables is that you have these experimental visualizations, and one of them is, are we running out of? No. One of them is the network graph. Now, if you're looking into tweets, you can actually try to see, so for example, if I say user and I say text, you could have like hashtag or retweets and then have their users and load. What it will show you is the cluster. So it's an influence cluster. So, so much, complaining about the virtual machine, and now it's crap. So eventually, you will see a cluster there. So you'll see the nodes and all of the connections between the different users based on that particular text. And what that allows you to do is actually identify key influencers. So someone that, let's for example do search term. There you go. So what it allows you to do is to say, for example, who is it? See, if you were looking into MSBI, for example, or if you're looking to a particular brand, the cluster, I know that it doesn't show very nice in here, but the cluster tells you a lot of information about what people are talking about. So if let's say that you have AdventureWorks, you have MSBI, how many people have talked about the both of them? It could be an influencer for the two different clusters. You can identify, is it a brand cluster? Is it a community cluster? If you identify a community and that community is just in the area where you're trying to see if there is an opportunity to sell your products, you might want to use this type of analysis to know who are the key influencers that can get you even more reach within that particular region. And all of this is free. All you have to have is a Google account. Obviously, considerations in data protection depends on what sort of data you may have. You might need to know that it's hosted in the UK or not, but as long as you anonymize it and you have the login details, you're still somewhat in control of that information. So again, you have a whole selection of experimental. Obviously, it doesn't always apply. And also in here, you have a whole selection as well of visualizations in this case do not apply, but they are available. So if I go back to map, I mean, this is fast. As I said, for example, The Guardian, I don't know if any of you have read the data blog from The Guardian. Yeah, some of you. I highly recommend, and you will see that every time they have a picture and dots overlaid, like for example, when they were doing the London bombing in the Second World War, it's actually using Google Fusion tables every single time because it's free. So with this, I think we've covered most of the stuff roughly, and I don't know where.
Quite a few technologies. Like we said, we're really working across as many as we could kind of fit into this presentation today. So hopefully there's some new ideas in there that some of you haven't seen before, and it's probably time for your surprise.
So I'm going to skim through a slide that it was in case I didn't have internet connection. So all we've done in terms of the map is combining the two data sets and publish it so we can see the overlay. And as a summary, and before I tell you a little surprise, we have combined Twitter information, SQL Server data. We've used SQL Server technologies and tools to actually be able to pull that information to and from. We've used some of the Redgate tools to make certain parts of the path a little bit quicker and a little bit faster. I've used the .NET bundle, although I didn't show it at all today, to create the visual, the script task within integration services. And then I published the information into Google Docs and the Google Fusion tables to be able to visualize that information. So again, before we were talking about analysis services, and some of you were analysis services developer, and I'm sure as me, if you use SQL Compare, you can see how easy it is to deploy. In a few seconds you have the script change and then off you go. But we're trying to do exactly the same for analysis services. So you can compare two analysis services databases and generate the XMLA that will just deploy the changes that you need and will detect which objects needs processing and which ones they don't. So you don't have to process full if you accidentally release it without meaning to. So at the moment it's in beta. If you could download, give us feedback, and we're also trying to see any other ideas. I know that some of you said integration services compare, please. But if you have ideas and tools for the BI that you would like to, get at some point, please follow that link. Try and try out the SAS Compare tool. Give us your feedback if you want, obviously. And I hope you like it because I'm very excited about this one. So I think I'm done.
I think we are. So thanks everybody for joining us. As I say, I really hope that we've brought in some interesting technologies that maybe you haven't thought about using before. Do head over to the Redgate website where you can download a 14-day free trial of any of the tools that you've seen produced by Redgate today. We do also have some messages from SQL in the City for you all. So all of the sessions are being recorded today and will be made available to you around August the 1st, along with the slide decks. And feedback forms are in the atrium and the library area. So please complete these and pop them into a bowl or hand to a Redgater for the chance to win an awesome prize during the draw at 5:15 p.m. If you can't find them, they'll be on the seats during the next session, so you'll be able to complete one then. And last of all, at 5 p.m. you'll be able to collect a goodie bag, book and t-shirt in the atrium, and there'll be free Redgate beer. And free Redgate beer, wine and soft drinks available to everybody. IPA. So just to point out, you were all about giving away the code earlier.
Yeah.
I'm happy to accept beer for anything that you want from the presentation. So you can give away as much as you want. But thanks guys, and if you do have any questions, please do stop by the booth and see us, or wait around here. We'll have a few minutes where we can speak to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.